Hello, my second grade friends. How are you guys doing? We are going to continue to read School Days According to Humphrey, our book right here. We just found out when Humphrey went home with Harry. Remember how he turned the clock fast 10 minutes so that they could always be on time. And then when he came back, it was the day for Miss Brisbane to roll out her plan for Brisbane's buddies, how friends are working together in a classroom. And Humphrey had, remember, mixed some names around a little bit with partners of friends. And Mrs. Brisbane seems to be very surprised at how well everything's going. So that is where we leave off. And then we found out that Miss Becker may possibly want to take Humphrey away or Og away. And now Humphrey is all worried that he is going to be separated from his friends. So let's see if that happens, okay? So our next chapter, we only have 2 chapters left. We're going to finish one today and then one next week, and that is our book. So this chapter is chapter 14, called Working Together, okay? The next day, I was pleased to see that Phoebe remembered her homework again. I was certainly glad I had changed the cards to make her a homework collector. Remember, Humphrey had done that because Phoebe was always forgetting her homework. So if she has a job as the homework collector, she has to turn in her homework because it would not look very good if your job is a homework collector and you forget your homework. Not good, right? Okay. Holly seemed really happy being helpful all day long, especially because Mrs. Brisbane kept her busy, busy, busy. Slow down, Simon. And had slowed down quite a bit because the door, as the door and line monitor, he had to wait for the rest of the students to line up. Hurry up, Harry was never tardy after recess or lunch because he had to leave when the other students did. And he was never late in the morning either. I guess the Edos had not figured out the living room clock was fast. Be careful, Kelsey was extremely careful when she handed Og out of his tank. Don't be scared, Og, she said. I would never let anything happen to a special frog like you. She sounds like a good animal handler. Just Joey tidied up my cage again, even though it didn't really need it. When Mrs. Brisbane came to check on him, she told him he had done such a great job. She would let him train all future animal handlers. That is so good to hear. Joey was overjoyed. Did you hear that, Humphrey? He asked me later. I'm a trainer now, not just a handler. Mrs. Brisbane really trusts me. I could see Joey's job was doing him a lot of good. In fact, all of Brisbane's buddies seemed happy with their jobs, except 2 of them. Can you guess 2? Tall Paul and Small Paul, maybe. Tall Paul and Small Paul had worked together to clear the bulletin board, but they still had not put anything up there. Mrs. Brisbane had taken out boxes full of art supplies and paper, maps and posters, but they just couldn't seem to agree on what to put up. Small Paul wanted to make the theme about autumn. Tall Paul wanted to make the theme about animals. Then Small Paul wanted the bulletin board to be about airplanes, and Tall Paul wanted to be about cars. Ugh. How about airplanes and cars? Transportation, Mrs. Brisbane suggested. The Pauls did not think those went together. I thought that the 2 Pauls didn't go together. I had obviously made an unsqueakably bad mistake when I decided to pair them up. Mrs. Brisbane, I don't think Paul G and I make a very good Brisbane's buddies, Small Paul told Mrs. Brisbane after lunch on Tuesday. Maybe you should switch us with somebody else. Well, you have to learn to work with people who aren't like you, the teacher explained. You'll have to do it many times in your life, right? Sometimes you don't work with people you like, but you have to learn how to do it. That's what Mrs. Brisbane is telling Small Paul. Small Paul looked miserable. He won't even try. And what about you? Are you trying? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Small Paul did not answer. You can do it, Paul, I squeaked from my cage. I'll try to be encouraging too. Boing, boing, he twanged. Mrs. Brisbane looked over at us. Look at those two. Can you think of two animals who are less alike than Og and Humphrey? That's right. He's an amphibian and I'm a mammal, I agreed. And yet they share that table and actually seem to enjoy each other's company, Mrs. Brisbane continued. He's cold-blooded and I'm warm-blooded, I added. So I think two boys who are the same age and in the same class and both like things like planes and cars can learn to work together. Don't you? Mrs. Brisbane certainly made sense to me. I guess, Paul said. He didn't sound convinced, though. So give it another try, Mrs. Brisbane told him, for Humphrey and Og, okay? I crossed my toes and I hoped they would try. They did have a chance to work together later in the day, but they didn't talk at all. They just stared down at the boxes of art supplies. Something I had not planned to happen next, Mrs. Brisbane asked Holly to return some playground equipment to Mrs. Wright. There were several bats and a box of balls. Helpful Holly had a little trouble carrying them all at one time. The bats crashed to the ground, the box tipped over, and the balls bounced all over the floor. She picked them up and then admitted she needed some help. Would you like to ask someone to help? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Holly looked around the room, and I almost fell off my tree branch when she picked Rolling Rosie. The smile on Rosie's face told me she was pleasantly surprised. I can carry the box on my laps, Rosie suggested. You can carry the bats. That's a great idea, said Holly. After they left, Mrs. Brisbane told the rest of the class, that's what I like to see in my classroom, working together. That's why I came up with the Brisbane's buddies. Small Paul glanced at Tall Paul when he heard those words. I couldn't hear him, but he said something to Tall Paul, who nodded. Soon they were actually talking as they pulled things out of the box. A little later, Small Paul asked, Mrs. Brisbane, could we borrow your picture of the kids in the class and go to the library? We need to scan them into the computer. She was surprised, but of course she said yes and wrote a note to Mr. Finch, the librarian. The Pauls were smiling when they both came back. After school, Mrs. Brisbane seemed unspeakably pleased with herself. Just before she left, she came over to our table to say goodbye. Brisbane's buddy seems to be working out, she said, even though I'm still not sure how those cards got switched around. Did Aldo do it? She laughed. You wouldn't tell on him if he did, which was true. The next morning, Small Paul and Tall Paul together asked Mrs. Brisbane if they could put up their bulletin board during recess. Yes, she said. I just hope Mrs. Wright doesn't find out. She wants all the students to get some fresh air. Because isn't it nice when you go outside at recess just to run around, play, laugh, and get some fresh air? The most important part. Tall Paul laughed, ran over to the window, opened it, and took a deep breath. There, I got my fresh air now. Silly kid. Small Paul raced over and did the same thing. Me too, he said. Then they returned to the bulletin board. I made a plan, Small Paul said, showing Tall Paul a piece of paper. I was glad to hear someone else in room 26 made plans besides just me. Tall Paul studied it carefully. That should work, he said. I guess I'll take the top part. Okay, Small Paul replied, and I'll take the bottom. I climbed up to the tippy top of my cage to watch as the bulletin board magically came to life. Tall Paul put up letters across the top reading, Brisbane's buddies. We work together. Meanwhile, on the lower half of the board, Small Paul put up pictures of students Mrs. Brisbane had taken on the first day of school. The boys had enlarged them on a computer and printed them out. He put them in pairs according to their jobs. Next, Tall Paul put pictures on the upper half of the board. When they got to the middle, they worked together and did not seem to mind one bit. Oh, they learned to work together. That is so great. They worked together quickly in order to finish before recess ended. Now add the drawings we did last night, Tall Paul said. Soon the job titles were accompanied by drawings the boys had made depicting each job. So they did a picture for each job, like teachers' helpers, They drew a picture for that. I would like to see what pictures they drew, actually. But we have no pictures in this book. So use your imagination. What would you use for teachers' helpers, or homework passers, or homework collectors, line leaders, and things like that? I wonder what you would use. Suddenly, I had an awful idea. That won't need two animal handlers. They won't need two animal handlers if they move one of us to room 18, I told Og. Og splashed loudly in his tank. They were angry kinds of splashes. By the time the other students in the room returned, the bulletin board was finished and it looked great, great, great. Awesome job. All the kids seemed to enjoy having their pictures on the board. I enjoyed having mine up there too, but what I really enjoyed was seeing that my plan worked after all. Small Paul and Tall Paul walked out the classroom together at the end of the day, talking about getting together with their planes and cars. I don't think either of them noticed that they weren't even the same size. Isn't that great? Humphrey did a great job. Whew, I said when Og and I were alone again. We did it, but it was a lot of work. Boing, 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 Og agreed. Aldo came in later to clean the room. I'm glad to see you two are still together, he said. Richie told me that Miss Becker said she had decided on which classroom pet she wanted. My tummy did a flippy flop. Which one of us is in it? I squeaked. She said it would be a surprise, Aldo added as he swept under the table. She would tell them tomorrow. Oh, and she said Mrs. Mack helped her make up her mind. Oh, my tummy did a somersault. Miss Mack loved me, so of course she told Miss Becker to pick me. I still miss my old friends from last year. So why do I feel so sad about leaving room 26? Aldo spent a long time in our classroom that night because he brought in stacks of extra chairs and left them in the corner. Mrs. Brisbane said she's going to need these tomorrow, he explained. Why did Miss Brisbane need more chairs? Was she going to get more students? If so, wouldn't she need a helpful classroom pet more than ever? Later, I made a few more notes in my notebook. Reasons why I am sad leaving room 26. 1, of course, leaving Mrs. Brisbane. 2, leaving Og. He is his best friend. And 3, leaving my new classmates just when I'm starting to like them. Oh, that is hard. I opened the lock that doesn't lock and strolled over to Og's tank. Og, old friend, I think I'm going to be leaving room 26, I said, even though I don't want to. Og bounced up and down so hard, I thought he had popped the top off of his tank. Boing, boing, boing. I'm sure you'll still help the students with their problems, I said, and I'll come visit you every night. I'll calm down a little then. Maybe Mrs. Brisbane will bring in another class pet to help keep you company. A cold-blooded animal like you. I thought that would make him feel better, but I don't think it did. He dived into the water side of the tank, splashing furiously, and I understood. I went back to my cage, but I didn't sleep much that night. My last night in room 26. Humphrey's Rules of Schools. Work together, please. Okay, my friends, that is it. That is it for chapter 14. We will read the last chapter, chapter 15, next week and see what happens. Do you think Humphrey is going to leave the classroom? He doesn't sound too happy. I hope not, because him and Humphrey and Og are best friends, and he doesn't want to leave his best friend. But he did tell Og, because he knows how to get out of his cage, that he would come visit him every night. But I don't know. I think he would still miss his friend, though, in the classroom. So, my friend, have a wonderful week. I miss you guys so much, and I hope to see you guys soon. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.